Ever get that feeling? Like you've got too many choices and it kind of freezes you up. You're at the restaurant, staring at the menu, and suddenly the easy option sounds best.
Way too relatable, right?
Well, that's the exact design puzzle the team behind Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom, faced head-on, giving players a ton of freedom, but without making it overwhelming. And that's what we're diving into today, how they pull that off.
A design balancing act, for sure.
And who better to learn from than the devs themselves? We're going behind the scenes with this GamerRanks interview, straight from the source.
Love when we get those.
Right. Now, right off the bat, director Tomomi Sano, he has this quote that just jumped out at me. He says, too much freedom can actually be stumping. And he's not wrong.
Definitely rings true.
Like, we want that classic Zelda feeling of figuring things out, but nobody wants to drown in a sea of choices.
Exactly. You get this weird paradox in game design. Too few options, things get stale. Too many. And players might miss the brilliance the devs put into it. It's like they're walking right past those aha moments.
Frozen in the cereal aisle of gameplay, right? Except instead of too many breakfast options, you've got over 100 different echoes to choose from. So how the Echoes of Wisdom team avoid creating, well, echoes of overwhelm?
Well, Sano uses a phrase that I think unlocks this. He talks about clearly defining the functions of each echo, and that's huge.
Okay, so break that down for me. Clearly defined functions, what's that mean in terms of player would actually experience?
Think of it this way. Imagine those 100 echoes not as some jumbled magic bag you're digging through, but like a well-organized tool belt.
Okay, I like where we're going with this. So instead of hoping you pull out the right thing, you've got, what, your hammer echo for smashing stuff?
Right. And maybe your grappling hook echo for reaching things. But the point is, the core function of each echo, what it does, that's crystal clear from the get-go.
Which must make a world of difference when you're actually facing down a puzzle in the game, huh?
Absolutely. You're not just randomly trying out echoes hoping for the best. You're thinking strategically, okay, I need to get across this gap. What tool in my echo tool belt does that?
Suddenly it's not about brute force. It's about, like you said, those aha moments.
Yeah.
That feeling of, I get it. I know what to use here.
Exactly. And that feeling, that's satisfying. It makes you feel clever, like you're solving the puzzles, not just stumbling upon the answers.
And that clever design even extends to how they handled Zelda herself. They couldn't just make her a walking, talking echo dispenser, right? What would be the point?
You're right. And the devs are definitely aware of that. They talk about it in the interview, making Zelda essential to the whole experience, not just a sidekick.
Which, honestly, so many games get wrong. You get that companion character who's all flash and no substance, so I'm glad they dodged that bullet here.
Me too. And while the interview doesn't spell out every trick they use to keep Zelda feeling important, it does drop some interesting hints, like breadcrumbs for us to follow.
Ooh, I do love a good breadcrumb trail. So how do we think they gave Zelda her own time to shine alongside this massive arsenal of echoes?
Well, for one thing, I think it's about synergy. Maybe some of the puzzles, they're not solvable with just echoes alone.
Okay, so you're saying you need Zelda's specific skills too? Like, what, her agility or something?
Right. Imagine a puzzle where you need to use, say, Zelda's agility to, like, manipulate something in the environment at the exact same time you're using the right echo.
So it becomes this team effort. Neither Zelda nor the echoes are enough on their own. You got to use them together.
Exactly. It's not echoes solve everything. It's Zelda and the echoes working together. That's where the magic happens.
And that actually makes those clearly defined functions even more important, huh? Because now you're not just thinking about what an echo does on its own, but how it interacts with Zelda's abilities too.
Totally. It adds this whole other layer of strategy. And again, that feeds back into the player feeling clever, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones making these connections.
It's like the devs aren't just handing you the answer. They're giving you all the pieces and letting you figure out how they fit together. Which, speaking of figuring things out, there's this line in the GamerRanks interview that's equal parts exciting and kind of terrifying. Aonuma uses the word mischievous when talking about how they wanted players to approach the game.
Mischievous is such a loaded word when it comes to game design, isn't it? Like, are they encouraging us to break things?
That's exactly what I thought. Not just solving the puzzles the right way, but finding all those weird, unintended solutions.
Right. They wanted players to experiment, to be creative, even if it meant more work for them on the development side.
And they were even okay with things getting a little chaotic. I mean, they mentioned this whole thing about a spike roller causing mayhem.
Well, that chaos is part of what makes it fun. Remember that phrase, pasting things anywhere? That's where the real mischief comes in.
Okay, yeah. Remind me about that. Pasting things anywhere. What does that even mean in the context of the game?
So, in most games, you have pretty strict rules about how objects interact, right? You use a key on a door, a sword on an enemy. But this pasting concept, it seems to break those assumptions,
You're saying, what, you could use a key on something that's not a door?
potentially.
Yeah.
Or an echo that's meant for combat. You could apply that to a puzzle in a totally unexpected way.
It's like they're giving you all these tools, but they're not telling you how to use them. You have to experiment and find what works.
And that's where the fun lies. It's like that feeling of discovering a cheat code or a hidden mechanic. It makes you feel like you're really pushing the boundaries of the game.
So even though the echoes have clearly defined functions, there's still room for players to get creative, to use them in ways devs maybe didn't even intend.
It's about striking that balance, giving players freedom without sacrificing the overall vision and design of the game.
And honestly, it sounds like they managed to pull it off. I mean, we're talking about a game with over 100 unique abilities, a companion character who's actually useful, and this crazy level of player freedom.
It's a testament to their design philosophy. They weren't afraid to take risks, to experiment, and to trust their players to find the fun.
Which, if we zoom out a bit, there's a lesson in there for all of us. And not just about making video games. This idea of clearly defined functions, that applies to life too, don't you think?
100%. Think about a time you felt overwhelmed by a task. Anything, a big project at work, organizing your closet. That feeling of, where do I even begin? It often comes from not having a clear starting point.
Too many options, no clear path forward. I've totally been there.
Of course.
Yeah.
But what if we took a page from the Echoes of Wisdom playbook? What if we broke down that big, scary task into smaller, more manageable echoes, each with its own clearly defined function?
Okay, so instead of clean the entire house, it's Echo 1, tackle the dishes, Echo 2, sort that pile of laundry. Suddenly it feels way less overwhelming, right?
Exactly. You're turning chaos into order. You're creating a mental toolbox where you know exactly what each tool does and when to use it.
And maybe, just maybe, there's room for a little mischief in there too, right? Like the devs were saying, sometimes the best solutions come from thinking outside the box, from trying something unexpected.
Absolutely. Sometimes you got to try that key on the wall approach just to see what happens. You might surprise yourself.
This has been eye-opening. We've gone from battling moblins in Hyrule to decluttering our closets, all thanks to the brilliant minds behind Echoes of Wisdom.
And the journey doesn't end here. Think about your own life, your own echoes. Those skills, those tools you use every day, are they clearly defined? Could a little more organization, a little more mischief, help you unlock even greater potential?
Now that's a question worth pondering. Consider that your call to action, listeners. Embrace the power of clearly defined functions. But don't be afraid to experiment, to be a little mischievous along the way. You never know what amazing things you might discover.
Couldn't agree more. Until next time, folks, happy exploring.
It's like you're saying, even if our listeners aren't, game designers or whatever, this clearly defined functions idea, it's got legs. It applies to life beyond the controller.
Oh, absolutely. Think about those times you feel totally swamped by some task. Could be a huge project, or even just like finally organizing that junk drawer, that feeling of where do I even start? Often it's because we don't have those clear starting points.
Too many options, not enough direction. Yeah, I know that feeling well.
Right. But imagine if we borrowed that Echoes of Wisdom thinking. We take that big, scary task and break it down into those smaller, bite-sized echoes, we'll call them, each one with a super clear purpose.
So instead of clean the whole house, which is daunting, it's Echo 1, dishes done. Echo 2, laundry mountain conquered.
There you go. Now you're cooking with fire. It's about taking that jumble, that mental chaos, and turning it into a system. That toolbox in your brain where you're like, boom, I know what this echo does.
And that sprinkle of mischief the devs talked about, that's got to have a place in the real world too, right? Sometimes the best solutions, they come from breaking the mold a little.
Couldn't agree more. Sometimes you got to try that key on the wall approach just to see what happens. You might surprise yourself with what works.
This whole conversation has been amazing. We've gone from fighting monsters in Hyrule to conquering our to-do lists, and it's all thanks to the design philosophy behind Echoes of Wisdom.
And now comes the real challenge. We hand it off to the listeners. Think about your own lives, your own echoes. What are those skills, those tools you use every day? Are they clearly defined? Or could a little more organization, a dash of that mischief we talked about, could that unlock even more of your potential?
Now that is a question to chew on. And on that note, we'll wrap things up. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive, everybody.
Until next time.